Recording is on. And welcome again to another edition of Talks Within the Nine-Sided Circle, brought to you by the Nine-Sided Circle and the brethren and sisterin of the Nine-Sided Circle, from beautiful downtown Oakland and beautiful uptown Hollywood.
I don't know about beautiful, but sure.
Yeah, well, it probably looks better than here, to tell you the truth.
That's true.
So here we are. We are at the eighth precept of the teachers, which is very exciting because I have actually, in my public lectures, I have never gotten this far.
Really?
Really?
About time.
It's about time. This is known as Recollection or Yad Dasht. And it's, you'll have to forgive me, I still have a bit of a cough. It's not a cold, it's not the flu, barely anything other than a cough. I blame the dog. Hello, the dog. Hark.
We lost someone.
Aaron is here.
Oh, really? Awesome.
Aaron is finally here. Yeah, he said he was going to be back tonight. We missed him last night. So, Recollection. This is the culmination of all 8 practices.
No, just, hey.
What? I'm fine. I am fine.
No, I'm trying to have this conversation.
I think it's...
There we go.
Yeah. So, some of you were there when I did the talk on self-observation, self-remembering, and self-remembering and self-witnessing. Mm-hmm. This is the equivalent to self-witnessing. This requires that you be in your body, in the room, and in your own awareness all at the same time. It's like juggling in a certain sense because you've got these 3 things going. And this is why the first 7 practices of the precepts are required for you to get here, because you have to be conversant with the elements before you put them together into its final form. And this, in a sense, is its final form. This is the sense where you let go of your attachment to hang on. For some reason, I just got a note from Mark that he can't make it into the meeting. And I must fix that. Kyle, fill them in while I'm doing this, because he sent me a message on his phone, so I can't just turn it over here. So Kyle will continue the lecture while I take care of this.
forget the stuff that's like, you know, way down the road and all. Yeah, I'm sorry if I mistyped that. There was a lot of distraction here, so you know that happens sometimes. So thank you for correcting me. Always a good thing. Self-witnessing, that's like paying attention to breath and, you know, staying in your body, paying attention to your own thoughts, that kind of self-witnessing that we talked about before. So that's when you take that stuff and combine it with all the other precepts that we've been working on.
There, we'll see how this works. Yeah, so self-witnessing. 3 components. Being in your body. You cannot self-witness without being completely embodied. Hence, why we start with breath, because awareness of breath, breathing consciously, puts you in your body. I mean, you can't do breath work without paying attention to the fact that you are embodied. Self-remembering is, in this case, being in the room. And even, there's Mark. For those of you who went through my video on the void practice, that is more the form of being in the room, to be completely oriented in the space that your body is in. Right now, you can perceive the space around you. You can feel the temperature of the air on your skin. You can have your awareness in the space around you. And you can have your awareness on your breath at the same time. And then the last bit is the self-remembering. The self-remembering is watching yourself be yourself. It is turning your awareness reflexively on your awareness. It is the transcendental reduction as opposed to the existential reduction. So right now you can notice yourself being aware, right? Just take a moment and go, oh, yes, there I am. I am aware. I feel myself being awake. I feel myself in the room. I am filling up all the space in the room, and I'm in my body and aware of my breath. For as long as you can hold this, you're in a state of recollection, literally recollecting.
Nick says, the phenomenological who's the question?
Epoche. It's actually pronounced Epoche. It's a German word.
Bad.
That's okay. You don't speak German.
Nope.
Everybody in America pronounces that word wrong, but I had a German philosophy professor, so I got it drilled into me the one true and absolute correct way to say that word. Epoche means bracketing, so it's not exactly bracketing. It is the reduction, but it's the transcendental reduction rather than, it's turning your awareness reflexively on your awareness, which ain't easy. It's like, in some ways, it's like trying to bite your own teeth. Eventually you solve that puzzle, but it isn't easy. So when you
is that basically attending to your attention? I mean, is that what you're
yes. Yeah, you are attending to your own attention.
Okay. Thank you.
And it's pretty analogous to what people call mindfulness. There are some relationships between modern mindfulness practice and what we're talking about here. Now, some ignorant Sufis, I love to say that, ignorant Sufis, suggest that this is a state of ecstasy, but it's not. It's the opposite of a state of ecstasy. You are not transported away from yourself. You are transported directly into yourself. And the closest analogy I can get to this is that it is a state of profound flow. And it's interesting because people can get addicted to flow state, and it can become a very dark thing. This is why people get killed every year jumping off of the sides of mountains in wingsuits and crazy shit like that, trying to surf 80-foot waves, or any of these others incredibly crazy things that people do, going over class 6 rapids in a canoe, for God's sakes. If you do it, the only way you can do it and make it work is to be in a state of complete and utter flow. You have to be completely present in your body, you have to be completely present in your environment, and you have to be completely present with yourself. This is why some people, and I observed this during the Vietnam War, some people developed what's called battle addiction. Now, I have just been informed that my internet connection is unstable. So if things get weird, I apologize.
Sometimes it just says that and it's fine.
How long could a person remain in this state? That's a very good question. And the answer is, I don't know. I know that you can remain in this state for a very long time. But I know that when your body goes to sleep, the state resets. But there are also, I think, degrees of this state. There's a place where it becomes station rather than state. You've all heard me just talk about this before, the difference between the state, what we call the hal, and the station, what we call the maqam. The maqam is where you dwell. Each of you has a maqam right now, a station of your being. And you move through these as you evolve. States come and go. I think that it is possible for a person to spend a very great deal of time there with the right amount of preparation. You have to be really healthy to stay in this state for any length of time, because there are demands that it puts upon the body and the mind. If you have a whole lot of crud still in your head from the basic fragmented ego, it's going to be really hard to remain in this state, and you'll strain yourself. Yes, I said it resets while you sleep. I mean, you go to sleep, your body goes to sleep, your consciousness turns off. That is the nature of deep sleep.
You lose that state of flow, right?
Yeah, you lose that state of flow. You must be awake to be in that state of flow. And so far, I do not know anybody who can actually stay awake indefinitely, in the sense of physically awake and not going into sleep state. Our bodies do not seem to allow that. If you stay awake long enough, you actually go psychotic. Mm-hmm. It's an interesting thing to observe from a clinical point of view, what sleep deprivation does to the mind. I don't recommend it.
Ahmed asks, would this be parallel to man number 4?
Probably, at least. So, for those of you who don't know Gurdjieff's man system, man number 1 is just the basic physical man. Man number 2 is emotional man. Man number 3 is intellectual man. And man number 4 is a higher order that combines all of these in a conscious way. And so, yeah, it's it's fairly analogous, I guess. I actually kind of, Nancy says, Ken Wilber wrote about being in a meditative state while asleep. It started after a period of isolation while writing. I don't know. I wasn't in his head. I can't say.
And Nick asks, but if someone were to be in an awakened state of consciousness while sleeping, would that also drive them insane?
No. Ahmed has the right of it. That's called lucid dreaming. Now, you can be in an awake state while lucid dreaming. As a matter of fact, I highly recommend it if you want a really interesting practice. And you will still touch deep sleep. It's the lack of deep sleep that seems to really make you crazy. You need the dreams too, but you can lucid dream and get all the benefits of dreaming. Does that make sense? A lucid dream is still a dream. You are in the dream world.
Nick says, makes sense, and so does Aaron.
Good. So, Yad Dasht is the practice of continually orienting oneself to the inner and outer worlds at the 3 levels of attention. When somebody is working at this level of practice, there is a constant focusing and refocusing on reality with a capital R, on al-haq, as it actually is. When this is going on, the persona, the personality is awake. And when the personality is awake, it is quiet. The personality is only noisy and irritating when it's asleep. What some of the 4th way people call the sleep of the machine. So this is a kind of rarefied at this point. And I'm hoping that you all understand how the first 7 steps along this path are necessary to getting here. So, just to clarify what Kyle just wrote, when the persona is awake, it's quiet. When the persona is asleep, it's noisy.
Oh.
Yeah. Sorry.
Like I said, caffeine, man.
Yeah.
And no French toast next time.
No French toast, more caffeine.
Yeah. All right.
Caffeine is the favorite drug of the Sufis. Yeah. Coffee may have came from Ethiopia, but the first coffee merchants were in Yemen. Moved all through the Middle East, and all of these Muslims who were liking staying up and doing devotions late at night discovered that coffee helps. And so it became a real thing. You know,
Yeah.
cup of coffee, sit up all night, do your tasbih.
Did you have a question, Omar? Or
Yeah, I did actually. So let's say that I'm aware of my body and I'm breathing. I'm aware of the room within which my body occupies, and I'm aware of being aware. And let's say if on top of that, I also still have images or thoughts coming in. Is that the persona in that case, is it asleep or is it awake?
I don't know. I'm not inside your head.
Okay, but I guess I'm looking at your definition where you say if the persona is awake.
In my experience, as long as I hold those 3 points, I don't have images. I don't have thoughts. I just am. So if you ask me personally how it is for me, that's how it is for me. How it is for somebody else could actually be different because, strangely enough, not everybody is like me. So speaking just from my own experience of working with this state, for as long as I can hold those 3 points, which is usually a moderately long time now after years and years of practice, I don't have images. I don't have thoughts. If I do have an image come up, it is something that I need to attend to in that moment.
So it looks like it's maybe Mika's got the point there. It may be intermittent. It may be that when you have an image coming in, you're no longer at that moment fully paying attention to the other 3 things. Is that possible?
Yeah, probably. The images will tend to be compelling and want to distract you from it. With this one exception, and Nick says you can witness thoughts periodically. Yes, you can witness thoughts. The one time, if I'm walking down the street and I'm really in this state and I'm moving in a state of flow and all of a sudden I get an image of the alley coming up and an urge to cross the street, I will listen to it. Because that is the universe trying to tell me something.
Okay. So noise, basically, kind of pointless images and thoughts and so forth, as opposed to something which might be useful, I guess.
A meaningful attention getter. Because if I get that feeling, there's probably something lurking in the alley that I don't want to meet up with. Rabid raccoon, feral cats. Nancy says.
She says, it seems to me that I'm paying attention to my breath. It seems to me that if I'm paying attention to my breath, I'm noticing that I'm paying attention to my attention. Am I kidding myself?
No, you are not kidding yourself. Your experience is your experience. Your thoughts are your thoughts. If you experience yourself paying attention to your breath and you experience yourself paying attention to your attention, then that's what you're doing. You are not hallucinating that. A lot of this stuff has been made overly complicated, and it's not. The hardest part of this is the self-remembering, the reflexive consciousness, because we're not used to turning our awareness inward rather than outward. Most of the time, our awareness is focused outside of ourselves or on the objects given to our awareness to observe inside of ourselves. But we have awareness on thing. When you turn awareness on awareness, it is no longer awareness on object, it is awareness on subject. And that's something that we are not as used to.
But basically, that's awareness of source or of the absolute, in a sense, coming through into the world, right?
Yes, it is kind of like that, yes.
Ahmed asks, is this the objective consciousness?
I believe that it is. I believe that this is what G talked about when he was talking about objective consciousness. He certainly knew these precepts and practiced them, at least in some form. You can see the echoes of them throughout his teachings. And so, yes, I think that this is pretty much what he was talking about when he said objective consciousness.
Nick
So,
asks,
yeah.
would you say it is at this point one is free to create a new narrative if so desired?
At this point, there are no narratives.
Yeah.
Creating new narratives is at a much, much lower level.
So this is past the narrative.
Yeah, this is past the narrative. And that's why Gurdjieff referred to this as objective consciousness, because narratives are subjective. So Nick asks, so I don't have to take people to this point if they want a better dream? No. And they won't find their way to this point as long as they want a better dream.
Yeah.
To really get this, you have to want other than the dream. You have to want the awakened state. And you have to want it more than you want the dream. And that usually requires a certain amount of pain and suffering.
So letting go of this story, like at this point you're kind of past that and you're just immersed in storylessness, perhaps?
Yeah. If a good teacher is constantly waiting for when they can introduce this. I am minded of my favorite student who at a certain point in their life had a tragedy. It's something that caused them excessive pain and misery, gloom and despair. And it was at that point where I knew that I could help them step from that side of their life to the circle of conscious humanity. And it was through some serious pain and suffering. It was no fun to watch. And yet, the outcome of that was absolutely wonderful. The best plants grow from the richest manure.
So often that is the case.
Yep. So, other questions on this? Other thoughts? Dave, you look like you're thinking something.
Hot seat for Dave.
I'm just thinking that it sounds very familiar, so it all makes sense and experientially is familiar to me. So, but it's not talked about too much. So it's interesting to see it discussed openly, I guess you would say.
Yeah. Usually you're not allowed to discuss this stuff openly because this is the secret stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm giving you guys the secret stuff.
So if this, what terminates either permanently or temporarily this state of awakeness. We discussed sleep as being one of those. What else would terminate something like that? Is it some danger in the environment that then...
Danger in the environment will not necessarily terminate a state of awakening. It might heighten it.
Okay. That's, I would think though, yes.
Yeah,
So
this is one of the reasons that I do combat sports.
Mm-hmm.
And I will bet you if we ask Aaron, he will tell you the same thing. He's the other person I know here who does combat sports. There is a place that you get because of the danger of what you're doing. And even though you're playing safe, you know, with rules and everything, there is still danger that keeps you awake. So
there's a confusion that in other words, I mean, you know, what are the pathogens here? You know, what do you watch out for, and what do you spray Lysol on, you know, in order to, you know, keep this state from disappearing?
well, if I were Patanjali, I would say it would be the kleshas, which are the 5 ignorances. Ignorance being the first of them. The 5 sufferings that keep people in a sleeping state. But that's going to take more time than we have to go into. Basically, Nancy says, is it possible to think of questions while in this state? Yes.
Earlier, Ahmed asks, is this comparable with the psychedelic state?
If by psychedelic you mean mind expanding, which is what the word actually means, then you could say so, because it is mind expanding.
And Dave had the thought that questions terminate this state.
I'm not sure that they do.
Hmm.
I think the questions might form a little bit differently.
Are they doubtful questions? Like
Yeah.
self-questioning type
No,
questions?
for me, it was like there's you can have a question and it can be a real question that pops up, but then there's these questions that aren't questions, which are just cycles of distracting away from the awake state. Am I awake? Is this awake? Blah, blah, blah. Then like putting it into models of systems of testing this. Is this the no mind state? Is this Mushin? Is this mindfulness? Is that what they're talking about? For me, this was very, very prominent in the tug of war.
Yeah, see, I don't think of that as questions in the same thing. If I am walking down the street and I am really holding on to this state and I walk past the taco truck, the question might arise, do I want a taco? And then the answer will arise, either yes or no.
Yes, I agree with this. This is my experience now, but my experience before was like a tornado of questions and comments. Yeah.
And that gets to, I think, the ultimate answer to this. What brings you from the state of recollection is identification with the objects given to your consciousness. The moment you go, I am this thought, or I am this feeling, the moment that you pull one part of that triad away from the present moment to turn it onto an object of consciousness, then you lose that state. You can still be in a very good state. It's just not this state. It's not the state of recollection. It's not the state of self-witnessing. And Nancy says, did you say that thoughts terminate the states? Some kinds of thoughts will terminate the states when you get lost in the thinking.
Did I hear you correctly when you said before that when you turn something into an object of consciousness, then you lose a state? As opposed to
When you identify with an object.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I thought you said when you make something an object. Okay, cool.
Yeah, if I did, I misspoke. Yeah, getting lost in those objects, identifying with them, attaching to them. Boy, if you want to see what will pull you out of this state, find something in your life that is important to you in some emotional level and lose it. There's a test for you.
Or I suppose crave it, right? I mean, craving, I would imagine, would have a
Yeah, craving is another side of it. Beings as I do foreign stress, losing it is much more painful. So, more thoughts on this? So, to reflect again, the exercises that you have been given, there has been method to my madness since the very, very first talk that I did for Sunday Talks way back in July or whenever it was, June or July of last year. Has it been that long? It's been that long.
We started in July. So.
Yeah. Yeah, since July of last year. Since that very day, I have been surreptitiously teaching you these practices. You actually now have all of the tools that you need to begin developing this. You have the breath practice. You have the void practice. And you have the practice of self-remembering. Bring you to a state of self-witnessing. You have the practice of self-observation to begin to remove the crud that is between you and your own awareness. We have Le Dog. He's very camera shy.
Yeah. Well, preoccupied with being comfy.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he moves around from comfy spot to comfy spot, making sure that all of them are well laid on.
Gotta make sure they're all kept warm.
Yep.
Never know when you're gonna need them.
All right, Dave,
All right,
we
Dave.
will see you. I'll talk with you tomorrow. And I think that I was able to look at that picture enough that I can say something not too unintelligent about it.
Okay, Ahmed asked if we can consolidate all those practices into one PDF file.
Not into one PDF, but we can consolidate it into one video. Remember, I told you for you guys who stuck through this, that I was going to do a special, not public video outlining all of the practices, how to do each and every one of them, all 9 of them. This will happen shortly after next week, because I want to get all 9 down, and then we begin to look at exactly how to do them. But I think that trying to do it as a PDF would be more tedious than I want to go through, because it's too much writing. I am not a writer, I'm a talker. So video, and you all can sit in the video with me or not. It might just be Kyle and I.
Perhaps. But,
Perhaps.
you know.
Yeah. But when we figure out when we have time to do it, I will make an announcement to those of you who are regulars And it will go up on our server so that you can look at it or download it there rather than going up on YouTube. Because you guys have actually earned this.
Sticking it out with us. That will be a
Yes.
green St. Patrick's Day. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
And not just because you drank some bad beer either.
That green Guinness.
Eh.
The streets of Boston flow green with green Guinness on St.
Yes.
Patrick's Day.
Yeah, I am told that we actually celebrate St. Patrick's Day harder here than they do in Ireland.
Oh my
Yeah,
goodness.
it's found
Everyone's
amusing.
Irish.
Yeah.
On St. Patty's Day. All right.
All right, more questions, more thoughts. Somebody has some weird noise in their background. Yes, Ilmar, go for it.
So this state of being awake, that's a
Yes.
state persona is in, right?
Say again?
It's a state that the persona is in, right?
Say rather that when the persona is awake, the essence is able to experience its own awakeness.
Okay. What I'm thinking of is a case of multiple personalities. And could you have like one persona which is so confused that the essence is not able to see its own awakeness, whereas when it switches to the other one, it is now?
Well, as it happens, I have had a chance to work with a couple of real multiples. For those of you who don't know, I put myself through college and graduate school working in some of the most interesting psychiatric institutions on the West Coast. And I actually had a chance to experience two people who I considered true multiples. And the answer to this is no. When you are that messed up, there is no part of you that's awake. Yeah, it's not like you have a Buddha personality that's going to pop out and be, if you did, it would incorporate the rest of the personalities. By the way, true multiples are really rare.
I don't know what they call it now. Dissociative identity disorder or something.
Yeah, they always come up with new names for it, you know, so that you have to understand that modern psychology is based not on what people do, but on what people can be billed for. I see Mark laughing back there because he knows exactly what I'm talking about.
I feel like a lot of therapists feel that way now, yeah.
Yeah. The DSM has become a tyrant over therapy. And it has nothing to do with mental health. And it has everything to do with what you can charge the insurance companies for.
Nick says, preach.
Yeah, those of us who have had to put up with that stuff understand this. And interestingly, there is no axis for normal in any of the diagnostic and statistical manuals. You cannot look somebody up and find, oh, this is normal, because normal is not billable. So literally, if a person walks through your door, if you are a therapist and you are accepting insurance, then you must find a mental health diagnosis for them, or a mental illness diagnosis, or you can't treat them. Even if all they need is yeah, even if all they are is a normal person who needs somebody to counsel with them, which is like the highest calling of a therapist, in my opinion. I think I've gotten Mark to talk, or at least to type.
Yeah. And Mark
Yeah.
says, and that diagnosis would be an adjustment disorder. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's why I turned my back on that whole milieu, because there was no way that you could work with healthy people. Even though in the 60s we had this great revival in therapeutic modalities where you actually started modeling healthy consciousness, it never took. So there you go. All right. Any last question?
Yeah,
Go
I
ahead.
have a last question or
Still
two.
more. Yeah.
So is this state of being asleep, is that something that's natural to every human being, or is that something which is caused by something like childhood trauma? In your fixation point, go ahead.
It is something that is unnatural to every human being.
Right. So it's caused by something external, presumably. And
maybe there are myths and legends about this. Gurdjieff's explanation is about the disaster not according to law, by which man can live more or less comfortably only as master and slave. He says that all in one breath. He postulates that somewhere around 4,000 to 6,000 years ago, there was this great catastrophe of consciousness that happened that basically turned us from conscious beings into unconscious beings. And 3/4 of Beelzebub's Tales to His Grandson is about this. And, you know, you get terms like Kunda buffer and all of this kind of crazy stuff. I tend to simplify it a little bit more and say that it was the process of domestication that caused us to remain asleep, because what should happen is we go through these states within our childhood and adolescence, and in our adulthood we come out of them. Just as a larva becomes a pupa, becomes a butterfly. We just don't become butterflies anymore.
so it's not a particular, I mean, listening to your fixation lectures or talks, I got the idea that there's a wound that happens, presumably usually in childhood, which produces a fixation. And I was wondering,
Yes.
is that fixation the thing that then leads to being asleep?
Nope.
Or are we got two different topics altogether?
It's almost two different topics. They are related, but not quite.
Okay. Because I was also recently listening to an interesting talk by Gabor Mate, and he seems to think that childhood trauma is kind of the cause of all of our problems. And if we raise children without such traumas, we wouldn't have any addictions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I was wondering whether
I think that whatever he's been smoking, I don't want any of it. Childhood trauma. First of all, that's almost a non sequitur. That's almost a completely meaningless phrase. What is he talking about childhood trauma?
Well, in his case, he's talking about the need for belonging and the need for self-expression or I forget the term he uses.
That's, by definition, that's not trauma.
But it's the conflict of those that when they conflict, that's presumably what on his view causes trauma. But I'm not particularly interested in discussing his views. What I'm wondering, what the nitty-gritty cause of this sleep state is. And you seem to suggest that it's for Gurdjieff, it's this mythological story, and for you, it's something a little simpler. And
Yeah, for me, I look at history and I look at where things change. I look at remnants of cultures that we have that are pre-agricultural, and I see them as fundamentally different in certain ways than post-agricultural cultures. And I think that the process of self-domestication that human beings went through in order to become agrarian is what created this. What stunted our growth to the point where we don't emerge from the cocoon. I don't know that this is true. It's a near-fetched story for me. Fundamentally, we may not ever know the answer to this, but we can observe the effects of it.
Well, I guess the practical question would become, you know, if you allowed someone to develop, well, how do I put this? I mean, you seem to be assigning culture as being the major culprit, right?
I tend to go with Terence McKenna on this. Culture is not your friend.
Right. Okay.
When it comes right down to it. Ahmed says, do you think that this domestication was a moment in time or just a process that happened throughout a long period of time? In other words, was it a shock that came from an external source or just a natural development or disintegration? And that's a damn good question, to which I have to say, I'm not sure. I think that it was a moment in time and place, probably in Mesopotamia or slightly north of there, that acted as a mimetic infection to the consciousness of human beings. And we have seen it travel around the planet because as late as the 19th century, there were still a lot of cultures that were not domesticated. The history of America is the history of the domesticated primates wiping out the wild primates. When it comes right down to it, because wild primates are dangerous and domesticated primates want all the turf. Nancy says, can a profession have a habitual Enneagram point? Psychology sounds like one. Could be. Banking might be 3. Acting might be 2. Being a DJ for raves might be 7. I haven't done enough research on that to, homelessness might be 9. Or being really, really rich might be 9. Think of Howard Hughes. So that would be an interesting area of research that I have not really put my mind to. So Ahmed, did I answer that question clearly enough for you? At least as clearly as I can for not knowing an absolute answer for it?
Just food for thought.
By the way, there's an interesting book that I've been reading, called this one here, Sapiens. I guess it's in reverse right now, but the title is Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind. And it basically goes into this whole process of, from his view at least, of partly of domestication, but all the other sort of quote unquote civilizing factors that occurred. And
I think you're the 3rd person in 7 days to mention that book to me, so I'm probably.
It's a good book. It's a very readable book.
Yeah.
When did it come out, Omar?
Just within the last year or 2. Let me take a look at the copy right here. It's been on the bestseller list. 2015.
Yeah. Nick's asking what book. I don't know. Do you want to type it out for everyone real quick?
I'll type it out. It's called
Sure.
Sapiens, and it's by Yuval Noah Harari.
So I just want to share a thought I had real quickly regarding like developmental trauma. I think a lot of developmental trauma emerges out of the fact that we have this, civilization thing going on that stunts our ability to care for one another and to, it just kind of creates this never-ending process of stunting one another.
And Mark makes a very important observation here.
What's that?
He says, it seems like the origin of unconsciousness is not as important as the remaining on the path to waking up. As a matter of fact, yes. It's interesting to speculate. It's entertaining to speculate. But quoting an old friend of mine, this is about waking up, not getting a PhD in waking up.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's true enough. And yet also, I think there's, at least on my part, an interest and a desire for a culture which supports an awake population, if you want, as opposed to represses it. And I think there's a lot to be said for our current culture as being antagonistic to the whole process of waking up.
Yeah,
so I think
just the world culture is antagonistic to the process of waking up.
Okay.
I don't know any place on the planet where it is safe to be awake. And that includes the normal places like India. You would think, oh, it's great to be awake in India. No, it's not. It's not great to be awake in any of the Muslim countries because they'll kill you. Just ask Mansour al-Hallaj. So instead of creating cultures, what we do is we create what has been coined as temporary autonomous zones. Right now, we are all sitting in a temporary autonomous zone. This is what we used to call in the old days a Durga. Durga is an interesting word that goes all the way back to the Sumerian. It means a tomb or a dark hidden place. But a temporary autonomous zone is a place where people can meet, they can be awake, they can do their work, and then disappear like fog under the morning sun so that the man can't find them. And that is why I created the nine-sided circle. The nine-sided circle is what I call an e-monastery. It is a virtual monastery that creates temporary autonomous zones for people to do the work. And without those sorts of things, without this, it's very, very hard to do the work. Physically, I mean, there is a danger in a lot of places to gathering physically. Look at what has happened to all of the Sufi libraries in North Africa. You get all of these crazy people who want to burn them down because they have words that they don't like. Aaron says, no, we got to go all the way back to Nancy here. Nancy says, parents that have children who want their children to survive and do well, which means raising them to fit into the culture. Yes, it gets passed down.
That's kind of what I was talking about, yeah.
Yeah. And then Aaron asks, what is the best method of being safe in the awake state? In this zone? This is one of them. Mr. Gurdjieff talked about the way of the sly man, which is basically the fourth precept, the Khawat Taranjuman, the solitude in the crowd. To be inwardly in your practice and outwardly to be able to create the personas that will fit in so that you will not be recognized as a blue baboon. Y'all know about the blue baboon? I see not. Let me tell you about the blue baboon. If you go to Africa where there are baboons and you grab one of them out of its pack and you paint it blue and you put it back in its pack, the other baboons will attack it and kill it. Even if it was the alpha male, they will gang up on it and destroy it because it no longer looks like one of them. Human beings do the same thing. Does that make sense?
Seems to. Aaron says makes sense.
Yeah. And Ahmed notes, with people, not of people, being with people, not of people.
Could I actually ask another question? I mean, shut me up if I'm taking too much time.
Ilmar, that's why we keep you around.
To take up time? All right.
To ask questions.
You know, throughout history, there have been attempts by groups like yours, like this maybe, to kind of infiltrate the larger society, mostly through art, things like poetry, things like drama.
Yeah, I was just telling Kyle about this the other day, strangely enough.
Well, maybe tell us all about it, because it seems to me that's one way to try to expand this circle into a larger society.
Yes, and Mark also makes an important consideration here. I'm thinking that safety isn't a serious consideration of being awake. And in one sense, it is not. Again, ask Mansur al-Hallaj. For those of you who don't know, famous Sufi, he was martyred for uttering the truth. And he didn't care. I mean, he was in a state of union with the divine. And he uttered the words, Ana al-Haq, I am the real, I am the true, which is basically, if you don't understand what he's saying, it sounds like he's saying he's God. But that's not, yeah, which is a big no-no, and then everybody has to kill him for heresy and all of that kind of stuff. But that wasn't even what he was saying. That was God speaking through him. He wasn't God, God was him. And so, yeah, he got killed. And we were all deprived of the rest of his wisdom because of that. Such is life. And I think that there is a serious consideration of keeping people safe in doing this work on a number of different levels.
So there's
yes.
that. Did you want to talk about that? I think, though, that maybe we should discuss what Ilmar was asking about in terms of ways that that awakeness can be diffused into the culture.
Yes.
Through art.
Yeah, I just wanted to get to Mark before we got into that. So I will give you one example. You know what the troubadour movement was?
Mm-hmm.
So the troubadour movement touched Europe in what was called Occitan, which is northern part of Spain, southern part of France. I will tell you that the troubadours were a Sufi plot. If you listen to their music, if you listen to their lyrics, they sound like something right out of Rumi. During the time that the troubadours were formed, the people who formed it were spending a lot of time on the Crusades in the Middle East, and they returned with Middle Eastern musicians who began instructing the young men in the arts of music, and also in futwa. It's a word that we usually translate as chivalry. Chivalry came out of the Muslim world. The entire concept of it came out of Islam, not somehow managing to just appear in Europe from nowhere. The whole thrust of the troubadour movement was to introduce the concept of love to a culture that did not have that concept to any great degree. And they did it through amazing music, poetry, deeds of martial skill. Later on, you have this thing about courtly love, but as one of my favorite scholars points out, courtly love was a thing of the mind. What the troubadours taught was called fin amour, which is the love that you feel for the inwardness of another. And if you listen to the philosophy of the troubadours, it sounds exactly like something that Rumi or Hafiz or Yunus or any of the great Sufi poets would have taught. And some of it came from the Holy Lands back with the Crusaders. Some of it came up through Spain, which was one of the most progressive Muslim empires in the world at the time. And it introduced things into the culture that are still existent. Everybody in the West has some idea of what chivalry is. Everybody has some idea. If I say courtly love, you have some concept of that. And interestingly enough, the person who was probably most instrumental in spreading the concepts of the troubadours was a woman named Eleanor, who was the Duchess of Aquitaine. She was also the wife to two kings and the mother to two kings, which included Richard the Lionheart, who was a troubadour, interestingly enough. And I think that it was because of his mother's teachings that Richard was able to come to peaceful conclusions with Salahuddin, the great Muslim general who was kicking a whole lot of Crusader ass at the time.
Mushtaq,
Yes.
what I was thinking when I posted that comment is when I start to have thoughts of my own safety, fear comes up.
Mm-hmm.
And that typically is an impediment to, living in more of an awakened state.
Yeah, and that's a very good point.
When I'm in an awakened state or some level of awakened state, safety just seems to happen through me. Does that make sense?
It does make sense.
It's not that I'm not safe. It's not that I'm going to go out there and just act and speak without any sense of potential consequence. It's just that in a more awakened state, I seem to act and speak out of something that maybe won't get me killed.
Yep. Or be aware enough to just kind of not be there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, I posted up a quote the other day.
Taken away from your question.
Yeah.
Mark.
Yep.
Anyway.
But the good thing is that we have really, really good questions. The bad thing is that I only have one mouth to answer them. And I only have one Kyle to remind me to stay on task.
Yeah.
So Ilmar, did I answer? Good night, Nick.
I mean, yeah. Night, Nick.
Did I answer your question well enough?
Yeah, I mean, I would be interested, of course, what other avenues or threads besides the troubadours, have occurred and how they work, and then what methods were more effective than others. It seems like arts are kind of a sneaky way of getting this stuff in.
Art is a very sneaky way to get this stuff in. Yeah. Another thread is Francis of Assisi, who was a troubadour, interestingly enough, who as a profligate young man went to fight in the Holy Lands and was wounded and was nursed back to health by an interesting group of people, after which he had a religious conversion and went back and became St. Francis. So that's another example. I'm not saying that the people who nursed him back to health were Sufis, but I'm not saying they weren't either. History is full of this. The interesting thing about Sufis is that they play a very, very long game. This is not a game of days or weeks or months or years or even centuries. This is a game of millennia.
It seems like a good avenue for somebody with these good views would be the whole area of child rearing. If one could somehow get some more reasonable principles into child rearing, I wonder if one could start this awakening process.
Look at Rudolf Steiner. He attempted that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, was Steiner connected with Sufism somewhat? Yeah.
I think peripherally. I think he had some experience through some of the lodges that he was members of. I don't think that there was a direct connection, but that's the first thing that comes to mind is Steiner, the school that Steiner founded is still around.
Right. Waldorf, right?
Yeah, the Waldorf School.
Yeah. Okay, good.
Yeah, and that was an attempt to help children be more conscious from an early age. The Montessori method is the same. There are lots of ways that this kind of stuff has snuck into the culture here and there. Not all of it is due to Sufis. I would like to take credit for it all, but it wasn't all us. There aren't that many of us.
Great, thanks.
Yeah. Any other thoughts or questions? Did you feel like we touched on your question well enough, Mark? I feel like you got interrupted a couple times. Good. Okay, great. Nancy says, I was wondering about the movement against corporal punishment.
I'm all for any movement against corporal punishment for anybody. What do you want to know about it? I mean, I can give you opinions, but
I mean, if you want to just speak whatever works for you, Nancy.
Any Sufi connection? Not that I know of. I mean, that is more, that is a view of a mature society. I will tell you, one, corporal punishment doesn't work. Two, it has unforeseen consequences.
Right, yeah.
So,
Mark asks,
Mark says,
does awakening
yes.
need to go against anything?
Not that I know of. Awakening isn't against anything. Awakening is just awakening. I think in an awakened state, some things become somewhat repulsive. Yeah, and that just has to go with energy laws. Like, I am pretty sure that you cannot be awake and be a Nazi. I think that these are mutually incompatible states. And if I ever ran across a Nazi who claimed to be the Buddha, I would laugh in his face. I'm pretty sure that you cannot be awake and be a racist in general. I'm pretty sure that you cannot be awake and be a misogynist. But it doesn't mean that you would be against that. It's just that you would look at it and go, that's really stupid. That doesn't even make sense. Why would you think that? As opposed to, we must fight this. Though, I will tell you that there have been periods of times in the world where, say, for instance, Sufis or Buddhist monks have taken up arms to fight some horrible case of injustice. One that comes to mind in recent times was Sheikh Omar Mukhtar, the great Libyan freedom fighter or Algerian freedom fighter, who fought the Italian fascists to a standstill. And he was just a simple school teacher, and word has it, also a Sufi. But, you know, that was a time when resisting evil was important.
Mark says, I think of awakening as not for or against anything, but a movement beyond duality.
Yeah, but then there's the aesthetic. I find that in the awake state, my aesthetic becomes very, very high. And I find that, say, Nazis are very unaesthetic. They offend my sense of aesthetics, as a matter of fact. They are not artful. And so whether it is duality or not, it's more a matter of art. Nazis, misogynists, racists, it's bad art.
Do you have ideas about awakening people with bad aesthetics?
No.
Okay.
Not my job. My job is to awaken people who want to wake up.
Yeah, it's hard to pull people into it if they don't want to go there.
Yes.
It happens, but it's rare.
Yeah, and a big part of this is the fact that it's a personal, you know, that there's personal agency involved as well.
Yeah, and there's that old Sufi saying, you could lead the camel to the oasis, but you can't make him eat the dates.
Right.
Yeah, but there's also that interesting movement that we had here in the 60s, you know, where we thought that something like LSD would bring people to at least desire awakening.
And we were utterly and completely wrong about that.
Well, were we completely wrong about it? I don't know. I mean, I think certainly it tweaked a lot of people into that interest. I know it partly did me, you know? I mean, it's just...
The fruits are what matters. What actually came out of that. What we got out of the 60s was the 70s. We got disco, for God's sakes. We got platform shoes and puffy shoulders and terrible mechanical music.
But we also got McKenna, and we got, you know, research into, you know, the psychotropic drugs. We got a lot of interesting stuff coming out of that also, you know. Well,
not a lot. It's a lot to you because that's an area of your interest. A few people got nudged. Most people didn't. And I say that as somebody who loved that particular time and that movement and was right in the middle of it. And it saddens me to say that at the end of the summer of 1967, it really was the death of the hippie. We actually had a funeral, marched up Haight Street with a coffin to put the hippie to rest. And people didn't really understand it.
Okay, all right, but the general point, I guess, is we've talked about the arts as being a way of infiltrating into an asleep culture or society. And I wonder, now we're kind of in the age of the pharmaceuticals. I mean, is there a place for something like that as an infiltrating agent?
Only if the artist is awake.
Okay.
It can become another distraction.
It certainly can become a distraction. So can art, so can...
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, Gurdjieff makes, and Ahmed, we will get to your question shortly. Also, Aaron made a very important comment.
It's relevant, yeah. He says there are a lot of reasons to be interested in LSD, both good and bad, I'd say. And yeah, that's how I see it.
Yep, I agree. So the thing is with, Gurdjieff talked about objective and subjective art. And if you want to be able to do the kind of infiltration you're talking about, you have to be able to make objective art. And in order to be able to make objective art, you have to be able to touch on the state of recollection that we have been talking about. Without that, you don't get it. And therein lies the rub. Art in and of itself will not do it. The hippie movement failed because even though we knew kind of where we wanted to go, we didn't know how to get there. And what we discovered is, like the old farmer said, you can't get there from here. And so Ahmed says,
do you think that awakening manifests in so many different ways depending on the consciousness level on the spiral, according to Ken Wilber? Meaning people or societies in the yellow are awakened in totally different ways from people or societies in the blue.
I think Ken Wilber's spiral theory is pure fantasy. Sorry, I do. I do not find it as being compelling as a model.
Ahmed says it's Claire Graves originally.
Yeah, same comment. I do not find it to be a compelling argument. In my experience, there is no spirals, there is no levels, there is no kinds. When an awakened mind meets an awakened mind, they're in exactly the same place. And I've seen this over and over again. I've seen my Sufi teacher sit with a tulku, and they were talking at a level that the rest of us could not even begin to comprehend. It was like they were communicating essence to essence. I have seen it with a Huichol shaman meeting a Sikh meditation teacher and seeing the same effect. So I think the model is pretty, but I don't think that it holds water. Just my opinion, but I am known for being opinionated.
And remember that in Wilber's views, at least, stages of consciousness are what presumably someone goes through, and then one of the late stages is this awake stage. States of consciousness could happen at any point, pop up, and then disappear, right? I mean, on his model, basically. But the claim would be that all those tulkus and teachers you talked about on his model would have gone through these previous stages of consciousness. Now, is that true or not? I don't know. Yeah.
I don't know either. I am dubious. I mean, in our tradition, like I was just talking about, we talk about maqams, which are stations. but you have to be really careful because they're not stations of consciousness. They're stations of sleep, basically. There is only one awake state. There are not many awake states. You cannot be just a little bit awake. That's like being a little bit pregnant. It's not a thing. You are either.
On that. I don't think we would have an argument with him on that at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mark also says, I think of awakened as a pure state rather than various levels. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Ahmed just had the comment that all models are wrong, but some of them are useful. And yeah, I agree with that. But,
yeah, and for me, this model is the opposite of useful. That's just for me. And you have to understand that when I say something like, I don't like that model, that doesn't mean that it's like astrology. You know, I don't believe in astrology. Doesn't mean it doesn't work. It just means I choose not to believe in it.
Does
so
that make sense, Ahmed?
Come again, please.
I just said, does that make sense to you?
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah.
And I realize that if you have an investment in a particular model, and somebody says, that model doesn't have value for me, it can be jarring, but take it for what it is, which is one point of view. If you get benefit out of that model, then it doesn't matter what I say. If I don't get benefit out of that model, it doesn't matter what you say. And it's not a matter of right or wrong. There is no right or wrong models.
For me, this specific model explains a lot regarding the behaviors of societies, things that they see from a country to another country, depending on the level on that spiral. For me, sometimes it explains a lot.
Yeah, and what I experience is totally different. What I see is it's a way to categorize different societies, and I've seen so many people use this model to feel superior to other levels, and I find that egregious. I'm not saying that you do that. I'm just saying I've seen too much of that, and that was initially, in thinking back, what turned me off to this model, is seeing people use it to look down on individuals that were from different places and had different ways of doing things. I tend to be very pragmatic about this, and as my old ones used to say, does it grow corn? That's the bottom line. Does it grow corn?
It's exactly like misusing the Enneagram.
Yes.
People sometimes they justify bad behavior because, yes, I am 5, I'm fixated at 7, so this is an excuse for me to have this. It's sort of misusing the same model. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's exactly that for me. So if you can find value in the model that is not about going, oh, these people over here are at a much lower level than we are over here, then this is a good thing, and I would be interested in you talking more about that at some point. I just refuse to accept the premise that higher or lower is a thing between cultures and awakening. And
Ken Wilber called it waking up, growing up. I mean, it differentiates between those two terminologies.
Yep. Okay, and Nancy observes that Michael Pollan is pushing a very researched, practical approach to LSD better than anything, but no sense of
exploration.
Better than nothing, but no sense of exploration. Yeah, I've read a little bit of Pollan's thoughts on using psychedelics, and I think that they're on the right track. I think that that outlawing psychedelic use was one of the more egregious things we have done as a species. because it is quite possible that psychedelics are one of the things that made us human. I mean, my old buddy Terrence was convinced that there were some apes on the savannah and they found an interesting looking mushroom and ate it. And the next thing you know, they were thinking. Maybe, I don't know. But the history of humanity is basically the history of the use of mind-altering substances.
I was just thinking about pollen and it's sort of, you know, the long game, what is left from the 60s.
Yeah. Yeah, and we're finally getting to a point where this is becoming maybe a reality. I hope so. So Ilmar asks Ahmed a question.
Yeah. I think Ahmed's taking it in.
That was more like an off sideline. I don't want to, you know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I understand. Right.
And Aaron observes that a good friend believed that cannibalism of the brain was the trigger. I find that a little bit more far-fetched because what we know about cannibalism of the brain is that it tends to produce prion diseases. Look up Kuru or laughing sickness, which was epidemic in parts of Borneo and New Guinea because of the practice of eating the brains of your enemies and or your dead friends.
Nancy
So
said,
yeah.
Cooking is a plausible trigger.
Cooking definitely had something to do with it because cooking allows us to extract more nutrients from plants. People say, oh, cooking destroys the nutrients in food, and it doesn't. Cooking makes the nutrients in food available. Yes, brains.
Because Aaron said, yeah, he has a phobia of eating any type of brain, which I get. Me too, kind of, actually, now that I think about it.
Yeah, brain is really, really high in fat. I mean, brain is basically, that's all it is fat. So from that point of view, brains are a good food. Some brains might be better to eat than others. Yeah, these days I don't recommend it.
Mm-mm. Mm-mm.
Yeah. I mean, if I was out in a survival situation and I was, you know, really hungry and I took down a deer, there is virtually no part of that deer that I would not devour.
I mean, that's a like emergency scenario, though.
Yeah. But I would be more likely to use the deer's brains to tan its hide so that I could have extra clothing, to be truthful.
Yeah.
I would eat the fat around its kidneys, though.
Nothing wasted.
Yes, we're going far afield. And it's already 8:30. So I am going to stop the video now. So thank you all for being here, and we will continue with precept 9 next week.